Now this is interesting because I've always heard this presented sometimes as a real experiment, but more so as a debunked experiment. I'm interested that this channel is presenting it as well. I don't know how they're presenting it. I guess we'll watch this video. I haven't seen this video. Definitely heard about the Russian sleep experiment. And if you just Google that, you'll find some incredibly. Maybe don't Google that. You'll find some graphic imagery, and they're looking at least supposedly the effects of long-term deprivation of sleep. So if you deny people sleep for a super long time, let me jump into this. Let's just see how this goes. So I'm very familiar with this, but I must say too, of all the pseudoscientific, whatever you want to call it, less valid studies, of all the things that I get asked questions about, I swear almost every year in psych class, someone brings up the Russian sleep experiment. You can tell it's well around the internet. So let's give it its let's give this video a look. Welcome back. This is actually literally morning coffee with the Academy. Let's do this. Whatever, you don't have to have a drink, and I need to not set my cup down on the same thing with the mic. Sorry about that. Here we go.
He expects to see his human test subjects alive and well. Instead, he witnesses absolute pandemonium. He hears screams of the damned, and in front of him is a body that's been torn apart and eviscerated. It looks as though the Antichrist himself has been in the room. Even the survivors have had chunks of flesh ripped from their arms and legs. Their ends of...
Okay, so if you've been watching these videos, you're getting tired of me by now making comments about these audio skips, but actually I was thinking about this. This actually, when I woke up thinking about this. So weird, but that's actually maybe intentional, because you'll notice in these videos it always skips a couple times near the beginning and then kind of catches itself and is fine. And I wonder if that's a feature, not a bug. What I mean by that is, I'm spending all this time trying to figure out how to fix that. Maybe that's on purpose to avoid some of the audio scraping that YouTube does. Audio scraping just meaning how they like immediately scan for similar music so they can hit you with copyright infringements. Like the very first video I did, I thought it'd be all funny and cute, and I put like the Rocky theme music at the beginning. If you're my students, you heard me tell this story live, but then I made this like long video. It was like a full class presentation, maybe 2 hours or an hour or whatever, however long. And at the beginning, I put like the dun 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 Rocky theme. And by the time it was uploading, and it's like 80%, 90%, 98%, 99% copyright infringement. It's like it didn't even click into 100% done, and they already caught it. So I wonder if these hiccups at the beginning are to avoid that. So anyways, this is just setting the stage for these Russian sleep experiments where they... Now, one reason that makes this actually possible, before we get into anything around the history or whatever, is the Russians and the Americans during the Cold War were experimenting with all kinds of weird stuff. Everything from mind control to telepathy to remote viewing to stuff like this to stuff like... Because there was such a race for any type of military advantage that they were willing to look at things that were big time outside the box.
of their fingers shown exposed bone. Their faces are sheared of skin. What is this inferno of madness, thinks the researcher. This wasn't exactly how the experiment was supposed to turn out, he thinks. Okay, the food wasn't great. We might have made those beds a bit more comfortable.
Oh, come on.
But tearing each other to shreds over a little lost sleep? Come on, guys. That's not very comrade of you. That nightmare scenario is straight out of the famous Russian sleep experiment, if you believe it really happened. Let's start from the beginning of the story, and then we'll tell you what our team of world-class sleuths dug up on the truth behind this horrific experiment.
Okay, cool.
So it's the late 1940s, and Soviet-era researchers have created a stimulant that they believe can keep a person awake for a long time, which is handy when you're fighting a war. In the
I'm hesitating to say basically meth, but basically meth.
Second World War, the Germans had their version of such a stimulant, which was a formidable methamphetamine called Pervitin. The Americans and the British would dose their troops with the amphetamine Benzedrine, which was similar to your garden variety speed. The Soviets are looking to up the ante and use their own version of a drug, which won't lead to a total wipeout after a 3-day-long binge. They've made something special, but they need to test it on humans first. It's not hard to find test subjects since prisoners of war were aplenty in the 1940s. And where prisoners were concerned, bypassing ethical considerations wasn't.
Right? So this is at like the height of the gulags. Maybe not the height, but this is when Stalin's gulag is just a Russian word for prison. This is when there's incredible repression happening within what at this time is called the Soviet Union, the USSR, which we would now call on a map Russia. That's complicated, but that's a
Isn't
different
such
video.
a big deal. They set up a test area where 5 subjects will stay. It's a sealed environment into which the researchers can release the stimulant in gas form and check if the
Gas
levels of
form.
oxygen are okay. The subjects have
Meth
been
in
given dried
gas
food,
form.
each a bed with no bedding, running water, and a toilet.
No bedding.
The researchers listen to the subjects through a microphone, and there are cameras through which they can monitor the subjects. The only portholes to the outside are 5-inch thick glass windows, which are barely good enough to see a shadow from. The scene is set, and the 5 men seem in good spirits for the first 3 days. The gas is doing its job, and the researchers are pleased about that. One researcher tells another, "Nazi meth, what a joke. Just wait until the world sees what we've cooked up. Comrade Stalin will be most pleased."
Right? Because if you don't get what that would mean, Nazi meth, it's clearly, it's widely reported. It's not even conspiracy theory. It's just recorded history that the German soldiers during World War II were experimenting heavily with methamphetamine. So Nazi meth is actually something that means, is just the way that this guy said it. It sounds super shocking almost, but it is soldiers throat. The Viking berserkers used to take a drinkable liquid that was basically magic mushrooms. The idea of combining mind-altering stimulants or mind-altering substances more generally and combat, that's as old as time.
The subjects have agreed to try and stay awake for 30 days and have been falsely informed that if they can
See, like,
make the
now it's
30
working
days,
pretty-
they'll get
pretty
their
much
freedom.
perfect.
Such a deal seems fair to them. Things turn slightly dark around the 4-day mark when the subjects start
4
discussing
days.
war and the horrors they've seen. They speak of traumas, continual nightmares, other ghastly things they witnessed. Day 5, and things get worse. The men start showing signs of psychosis, talking to themselves and things that are not there. They grow paranoid of each other and start whispering into those microphones, telling stories about the other subjects. The researchers, of course, know all about sleep deprivation. After 5 days, the mind can turn on a person. Hallucinations can seem real and horrifying. But they wondered, was it the loss of sleep or the gas itself? Suspicions about the gas effects were more solid at day 9, when one guy just started screaming, howling like a banshee and running up and down the room.
Now, for the point of looking at the interestingness of the study, maybe we'll just sidestep the whole ethics consideration. Obviously, you're doing incredible harm to the participants, but again, if you're in Soviet Russia, Soviet Union, doing experiments on your political enemies that are prisoners in your gulags, maybe ethics isn't a huge concern. You know, looking back at this through Canadian 2020 eyes, you're like, well, what about the poor research subjects? It's like, oh, they could not have cared less. So that's just interesting to keep in mind.
He screamed so much he seemed to tear his vocal cords, because after a few hours he squeaked like a children's toy. A few more days passed and there was an eerie silence. The men could not be seen from the cameras. They were alive for sure since the oxygen levels indicated 5 breathing men, but where were they? The researchers hadn't wanted to interrupt the study, but they felt that they had no choice, and so said into an intercom, "We're opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of
You will
you
be
immediate
shot."
freedom." They heard one voice respond. It said, "We no longer want to be freed." What was this? Had they been getting ripped on that gas and were now addicted? The researchers said there's nothing we can do but open the door. They opened the vents and let fresh air displace the residual stimulant. What the researchers heard next was the men screaming again, pleading for more of that damn fine gas. WTF, thought one of the Russians. Those guys are seriously hooked. They opened the doors on day 15, and to their surprise saw one man was dead. You know what the scene looked like because we laid that out for you in the intro, but we didn't tell you what happened shortly after the gruesome discovery of the half-eaten man and the wounded survivors. On closer inspection, the researchers saw that the wounds on the men were very bad. They looked as if they might have been self-inflicted too. They had torn the skin and muscles from their own
They're just
chests,
tripping
which revealed the
insanely.
horrific sight of the men's lungs. Each man, it had seemed, had
Jeez.
performed this macabre surgery on himself. Blood vessels that were still working had been removed. Other internal organs were seen laid out on the floor like a piece of art, and the men were going to eat those morsels. They were dining on their own bodies and doing it with
If you guys are like, what the hell, Mike? This is supposed to be morning coffee. It's like, sorry guys, I didn't pre-watch this. I knew of this study, but I didn't know that they were gonna, whatever. I guess it's way better as an animation though.
enthusiasm. The researchers called for backup, not daring to go near those poor wretches. They closed the door to howls of the men pleading for the gas to come back. When soldiers arrived to help remove the subjects, the extrication process wasn't exactly fun. One of the subjects ripped a man's throat right out, while another soldier had his balls removed. 5 soldiers lost their lives in total,
What?
but some of the victims took their own lives after the event. Once the subjects were out, the doctors injected enough morphine into them to sedate a Canadian moose. But the men still fought like wild beasts.
What a-
One
what a
subject bled
sight.
out and his heart stopped beating, but he
Whatever.
still carried on screaming, "Give me gas! I need gas!" A doctor had some bones broken during that grim spectacle. The 3 others were eventually sedated and strapped and moved to a secure facility. The researchers talked to each other, saying things like, "That wasn't meant to happen, was it?" They hated to admit it, but maybe the Nazis, the Brits, and the Americans had done the right thing in just plying their troops with top-notch crank. The surgeons got to work on putting the missing organs and bits of viscera back into one man, but this guy almost broke through his restraints. When the docs finally got the anesthetic into him, the man's heart stopped and he died right on the spot. The autopsy showed he had broken
Yeah, it's so weird to get into the morals of combat, because in a combat situation, maybe you actually want a stimulant. It's easy to be super judgy, but what you don't want to be is fighting against another group of guys that are basically the same as you, that are all juiced up. Obviously, speed has terrible long-term effects, but sorry, I think I set that on the floor. But there's no doubt it would create just an insane opponent. You would not want to. Well, if you've ever just witnessed somebody yourself that's been in the midst of a bad meth trip, or just even seen, like any episode of Cops on TV or whatever, right? And I'm not laughing at drug addiction. I'm just saying, like, you don't want to be fighting a guy that's not feeling pain and that's thinking that they're untouchable and that nothing matters. Being in a fight with someone with nothing to lose is the scariest thing if you have things to lose, which hopefully you do, because that means that you have valuable things in your life. And I'm not talking about money. Okay. Anyways, that got ranty. Don't even know what my point was. Let's go back to this.
9 bones and his muscles were torn all over his body. When they tried to fix up the next man, they decided 2 deaths were enough and didn't use an anesthetic. They patched him up nice, sewing his ruptured organs and laying skin grafts on him. The head surgeon said this man should not be
no
alive
anesthetic.
after what he's gone through, but he admired his own work. A nurse commented that during the surgery, the beast had been smiling at her. She did wonder how male carnal instincts can remain functioning during the worst times. Maybe with death comes the need to create something new, she philosophized, but quickly shook herself out of her reverie. The man suddenly started making a
Philosophized.
wheezing sound as if he wanted to say something. The nurse, quick to catch on, handed him a pen and a pad below it. The man wrote, "Keep cutting." Wow, she thought, what a maniac. She was glad she'd not reciprocated his flirty smile. As for the other maniac, he laughed like a hyena during his bodily reconstruction. He said he wanted that gas, the good stuff. And when asked why, he said he just needed it to stay awake. The surgeon mused, if these guys weren't so hell-bent on eating themselves, they'd make excellent night shift custodians. Cleaners, perhaps, or maybe security. But he knew all
that's the
too
kind of
well that they
insight they're
couldn't be
taking from
trusted to wash their hands. Then, a former KGB agent had an excellent idea, something that had amazingly escaped everyone else's thoughts. Why not put these poor suckers back on that gas? He said it seems the problems all start when they all go into withdrawal. Hi, they're okay, if not a bit hyper and paranoid. We can work with that. Once back on the gas, they were fine and dandy, but then something strange happened. The EEG monitor showed crazy brain activity, but then it just died down. One man flatlined. Finally, he just died. His last boost of that junk had done him in, or at least it seemed so. The last guy ended up back in the study room with the other guy seemingly dead on the bed, but 3 researchers were in there too. Suddenly, one of the researchers shot the commander and then shot the subject. He then shouted out loud, "I won't be locked in here with these things, not with you. What are you? I must know." The subject that was shot but evidently was not dead replied, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." That was almost the end, but for good measure, the researcher put a bullet into the man's chest, which might have breached the Hippocratic Oath somewhat, but hey, harsh times call for harsh measures. The end.
Yeah, maybe.
So, a lot of people seem to think this all actually happened. Now, without much investigation, one can easily tell by reading this catastrophic flash fiction that it's written by someone whose grammatical skills need improving. Not only that though, the story simply doesn't make sense at times. Quite a few times someone dies and then just comes back to life, and we don't think it's on purpose by the storyteller. He just forgets what he said or her. On another part, the writer says that the oxygen levels indicated the men were alive, and the researchers knew that, and then in the next part he said the researchers were not sure if they'd all died. But there's more than bad writing that gives this away.
Yeah, good point.
Where do we start? Well, we might not need to tell you that you cannot rip out vital organs and lay them on the floor like a bunch of textbooks. That's pure fiction. Those men would have died from blood loss or shock. Remember that they were discovered like this and left for some time before the soldiers came. Okay, you say, but that was the gas working. This was a secret experiment that went wrong. High on that wicked drug, maybe men could routinely come back from the dead and rip out their own organs and even do a bit of flirting when the mood took them. How do we know that it isn't true? Well, there is the matter of recorded history and plausible science. No gas has ever been discovered that can keep a person awake for 15 days. Never mind turn that person into a self-loathing zombie. There is no history of the experiment anywhere but on a website that's known for its scary, fictional, I'll say it again, fictional tales. It would be astounding if one author alone, writing badly from his or her bedroom, had access to more secret information than the CIA and the British Secret Services. As we said in the story, and we embellished this part ourselves, many soldiers on all sides of the war broke so bad that they could stay awake longer. The officers were handing out that stuff like candy, but not even the most dedicated ice fiend could stay awake for 15 days. And those badly buzzed soldiers would have likely only done 24 to possibly 36 hours awake. The Pentagon has even done studies on this, and even if men are forced to stay awake for more than 48 hours, they will become pretty slow and pretty much useless as soldiers. They'll make tons of mistakes, which is not ideal in war when you have to be constantly alert. Sure, the speed helped the Germans with their blitzkrieg attacks, but the drugs had to be taken with some precautions. With this in mind, the Russians would not have even tried this experiment. There is something called Morphin syndrome that can cause severe delirium and very bad insomnia, and sufferers can go into a dreamlike.
So here's an interesting thing, and one of the reasons why a story like this would get some traction, and I started out this video saying this, is that there was an incredible amount of experimentation that happened in that Cold War era, both by by several sides, but primarily, or primarily with the Americans and the Russians. And so the chances of the Russians doing experiments that were pushing the realm of what we know about human beings, about human potential, about the brain, about physicality, whether it's how long you can stay in cold water, or whether it's and stay alive, or whether it's how long you can go without sleeping, or whether it's how long you can go without eating. They're doing all these kinds of experiments on prisoners, and so are the Germans. And so, but then with the downfall of Germany after World War II, and you get this power vacuum and this race to the top, which gets, kind of in general titled the Cold War. This race to the moon, this race to the atomic bomb, this race to be the superpower between the States and Russia. So the reason I'm saying all this rant is because the context of the world political military situation was such that people were doing experiments that even in hindsight might look crazy, because even an inch of advantage over the Americans or over the Russians, or whatever side you're on, was worth taking chances, right? So it was a desperation based on necessity to not be behind, right? Because people didn't know. People didn't know. Maybe you can control people's minds. Maybe you can hypnotize people and control their minds. And if this was the fear, is like if the Russians learn how to do that first. And remember in the psych class, I showed that classic video of the soldiers that were captured by the Koreans, and this is during the Korean War time. And when the footage came back to America of these people, these Americans that had been captured, these POWs, who prisoners of war, who were then going on video talking about how the Americans are the real enemy, and clearly had been brainwashed. That's where that word brainwashed even started. We watched a video about that in the psych class. So if you're in the psych class, you know what I'm talking about. That video actually would be a cool one to do on this. So anyways, I'm just saying, this sounds like BS. The only reason I think there could be some possibility is because a couple things. One, it happened within a time period where people were taking chances that seemed dangerous and unwise today. There was no, number two, there was no consideration at all for ethics. So the whole idea of like, what about the rights of the people being experimented on, which like in Canada in 2020 is a huge thing, and you want to go do a study on human participants with any legitimate organization, and you're going to have to do a huge review ethical process to prevent stuff like this. And if you're in my classes, we talked about like the Stanford Prison Experiment, the Milgram Experiment, as like way less extreme examples of this. But again, in Soviet era Russia, you're experimenting on political enemies that are prisoners. Again, ethics isn't a consideration here. This is science in the pursuit of knowledge, right? They're advantage. Science in the pursuit of advantage is how I should say it. Okay, I can hear Evie stirring. I got her watching a video. We're gonna go outside and play, make some hopscotch on the sidewalk in just a sec. But I wanted to get my morning coffee in with you guys. This video only has like a minute left, so let's keep going here.
State. We say dreamlike because even if they don't sleep, they will have microsleeps. Plus, no one with this disease has ever started eating themselves. Sure, perhaps a noxious agent sprayed into a room full of guys can kill someone, but it's very unlikely it could turn them into gas-addicted zombies. There's nothing in scientific literature that supports anything in this experiment. There's another thing that can cause massive sleep loss, and that's called fatal familial insomnia. But that's passed down through genes and isn't caused by environmental agents. And again,
so there is that. It's, I forget what it was, like familia, meaning like passed through the family line. Insomnia, there was another word in front of it, fatal maybe. Fatal familia. Insomnia is a huge term that just means a type of sleep disturbance condition that gets passed down in families. So again, the chances that's super rare. So the chance that you pick like 10 people for this experiment and they all have it, again, it's like that'd be like if you needed to make that point and you're thinking of any way to
doesn't,
prove that
and
point.
it will never make someone just want to rip out their own organs and eat them. There's just nothing that exists in this world that aligns with the story, and if it did, we would expect it to have appeared in medical journals before it became an internet meme. Then again, many of you have been asking in the comments how we managed to put out so many episodes per day. Maybe the entire staff of the infographic show are crank-addicted zombies with an undying lust for human flesh after all. Of course, that's preposterous. But isn't that exactly what a team of crank-addicted zombies with an undying lust for human flesh would want you to think? The Russian sleep experiment isn't a bad story, but it could have been better. Sleep deprivation is actually a torture that has been used by militaries, and that itself can drive a person half crazy. Still, in this story, when you add the addictive gas and the organ rug and the reanimation, it just isn't believable. But if you like scary stories, then we suggest you watch some of these insanely creepy shows. Do these horrifying internet stories
Again, that video, I'd score that video high, man. That video was cool in its objectiveness. Like it told the story and then it ripped the story, but it didn't rip the story to I hate when things, it's like the taking the higher ground and making fun of everything. It's like actually this when you understand the context and you understand that people were doing, no, there's a movie that came out a few years ago called Men That Scared Stare at Goats, and it's a comedy. It's supposed to be a comedy. It's a spoof. In my opinion, it's what you call whitewashing. It's a scenario where they're trying to make something that, well, they're making a joke out of something that was real, right? Like the CIA definitely experimented with. Well, you just have to Google the term MK Ultra, MK, and then the word ultra, and they were experimenting with mind control. Of course they were. And they're trying to see, like, could you sit there and focus on this goat and actually affect that goat? And they made it into this like funny, stupid movie, but it's like, because it's funny and stupid now that we realize that you can't do that. But again, they were testing anything that had to do with psychic power because they just didn't know what limits were. And remember what I'm saying here, it's not like they were all just curious people sitting around like having a beer being like, I wonder what we can do. These were people that were like, those people over there are trying to end us and we need any advantage we can have. And we're not willing to say no just because. Let's test everything. Um, and in that kind of, and when you combine that with a group of subjects or a group of study participants that you don't care about, that are actually your enemies, that are actually your prisoners of war, your gulags prisoners, it creates a situation where a terrible experiment could theoretically have happened. Right. So now again, saying that the potential for it to happen is not, obviously not evidence for it happening, but again, you can see where what I'm trying to show with this video is, even though this is most likely untrue, the specific details were the Soviets experimenting on their prisoners. I think it'd be almost insane to think the answer to that is no. So, were the Germans? Yeah. So, I won't, yeah. It's complicated. It's complex relationship between psychology and military. And maybe that'll be my next video, or I don't know. I'm going to hit that from a bunch of ways. I'm going to do Project Orion soon. I'm going to start getting into some of this, but I don't want to turn this into like a conspiracy channel because that's not what I'm trying to do. And not that there's anything against that. I like my fair share of that too. But I think since this has at least somewhat of a school association, uh, I'm gonna focus, if I do go down those routes, more on this kind of thing where it's like, let's talk about what the story is, why people are feeding into this, right? So like in this, some of the context actually makes sense whether or not the actual story is true or not, and then dive into it, right? And let you as intelligent adults come to your own conclusion. Anyways, I don't think there's any conclusion to come to. They definitely experimented on soldiers. This is definitely at the very best a hardcore exaggerated story, and at the worst a complete lie. But it's an interesting talking point because there was all kinds. The history of experimentation on prisoners is one of the most brutal topics. And not a good way to start your day. So maybe we'll save that for some other time. I'm gonna follow this up with a more fun one. But yeah, I think that worked cool, and I think I've figured this out. I think it's a feature of this, not a bug. I don't think it's a pro. I think how it skips at the beginning might be to get around the audio scrape that YouTube does, because now I've been going for a while. It doesn't show a time recorder, but that video was 12 minutes, and I've been talking my head off. This has to be like 20 minutes, and it only hiccuped at the beginning, like it has in all of them. So if that's the case, and then that's going to encourage me to use longer videos. If the hiccup's just at the beginning and I'm using like a 2-minute video, then it seems like it's a lot. But man, this is, if you guys like this and you want to send me a direct email, my students, if there's something you want me to get into, because I'm looking at lots of stuff. My next, I know I could go a lot of directions. I'm looking at wormholes. So I'm looking at things like outer space. I'm looking at things like dolphin intelligence. I'm looking at things like some old military experiments. Um, I want to also get into some mindset stuff. I want to every couple I'm going to keep on this idea of how we keep our focus and how we get through this time right now, and how we, not just get through this, but how we remember who we are and what we're doing. And anyways, I'm getting ranty because this is all freestyled, but there's more to come. And all I was trying to say there is, if you're my student and you know me and you want me, or you just think it'd be, hey Mike, do an interesting one on telekinesis, whatever. All right. Love you guys. Take care, and keep your stick on the ice. That's what the Red Green show. Red Green, famous Canadian comedian, had a show called The Red Green Show. Him and his cousin Harold. And Red Green, at the end of the show, he'd always say, keep your stick on the ice. And if your kid's a hockey player or you're a hockey player, that's the most important metaphor. It's a Canadian metaphor. It's a cool thing to think of, because that means, like, it's like if we're playing hockey together and I pass you the puck and you're holding your stick up in the air, it's like you're not ready to play. Keep your stick on the ice. It's like you got to be, if you're in the game, be ready to respond, be alert, and stay frosty. Keep your stick on the ice and stay frosty. That should be, we'll make t-shirts. We'll make t-shirts, and I'll get them printed and we'll do them for free or whatever. Anyways, I don't know. But yeah, keep your stick on the ice and stay frosty. That should be our catchphrase. Anyways, you don't need a catchphrase. It's not like, again, you guys, I'm like the worst at ending these things. I just need a clean stop button to like go in, and maybe I can. Yeah, here we go. Okay, anyways, I'll get this up. I should get this thing up. You guys can't see even what I'm talking about, so this is all just cutting room floor material here. But anyways, love you guys, and yeah, keep your stick on the ice and stay frosty. Let's try it. I'm probably gonna hear myself say that and want to change it, but whatever. Cheers.